Welcome to Dragon in the Room, episode 5. This is Pili. Today we're going to learn more about the Tiananmen Square massacre on June 4th, 1989, wherein many pro-democracy student protesters were killed by the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP. Death tolls of the massacre ranged from the low hundreds to nearly 10,000. And victims were as young as 9 years old and as old as 66. Nowadays, some Chinese people believe that this historical event was fabricated, while many others believe it did occur but say it was justified. However, the majority of the young Chinese people have no awareness of it whatsoever. For example, 25 years after the massacre, a study showed that only 15 out of 100 Beijing University students recognized the famous Tankman photo, which became a symbol of the massacre. For those who are somewhat aware of what happened in Tiananmen Square in 1989, many believe the massacre was justified. Because according to the CCP, the protesters were, by definition, counter-revolutionary rioters, and killing them was the only way to keep China stable and strong. But there have always been people who know the real truth of the matter and try to keep it alive. They are the ones who carry on the fight against the CCP to secure greater freedom for Chinese people. For example, a group of Chinese democracy activists called the Tiananmen Mothers seeked out family members of the students and citizens who have been killed or wounded to hear their stories. Even though families who provided information to the group might get into trouble with the government, they still cooperated, and so enough materials were gathered to publish a booklet called Witnessing the Massacre and Seeking Justice. It included names and photos of people who died in the massacre. According to the witnesses, Beijing citizens who were initially uninvolved in the protest, but bravely putting themselves in danger by trying to rescue the dying protesters, were among those killed. I would like to share with you the stories of some of those people today. I learned about them from Liu Xiaobo's book, No Enemies, No Hatred. You might be familiar with the name Liu Xiaobo, as he was a Chinese writer, literary critic, human rights activist, and Nobel Peace Prize laureate, who was involved in the Tiananmen protest and was imprisoned by the CCP for his political opinions. Here are some of the descriptions of the brave people he wrote about in his article called Listen Carefully to the Voices of the Tiananmen Mothers. Cheng Renxing, a 25-year-old student at People's University, was just about to withdraw from the Tiananmen Square when a random shot followed him. He collapsed at the base of the flagpole that faces Tiananmen. Wang Nan, a 19-year-old student in senior high school, felt an urge to record the true facts of history. He ran towards Tiananmen Square carrying a camera, but before he could use his camera to document anything, his own life itself was spent as a piece of evidence of barbaric massacre. On the evening of June 3rd, Jiang Jielian, a 17-year-old high school student, defying the tearful admonitions of his mother, who had locked all the doors of their residence, jumped out of a bathroom window and ran towards the blood-stained Chang'an Boulevard to join a massive of people who were trying to dissuade the martial law troops from advancing. His dissuasion failed, and the bullet took his life. Du Guangxue, was a 24-year-old worker, a passionate young man who had visited the protesters at Tiananmen many times. At midnight on June 3rd, he heard that people had died at the square, so he hopped onto his bicycle to see what he could do, and was shot to death while biking passing Xinhuamen, about a mile away from Tiananmen Square. Sadly, many who managed to escape death that day still wound up in prison, and a lot of them got heavy sentences of 10 years or more. And for 32 years now, the truth has been locked up with them. Today, I'm so honored to get the chance to speak to Hansdale, who is one of the witnesses of the massacre. Hi, Hansdale. Welcome to Dragon. Could you share some of your feelings about what happened that day with us?
Oh, hi, Philly. Yes, at the time, I was in my third year of college, and a lot of students started hunger strike. They only drank water in an effort to try to pressure the government. They were starving badly, but they were still humming the song, like Offspring of the Dragon, which had a strong impact on me. And back to that time, almost all Beijing citizens were out on the streets and were so supportive of the protesters because they all knew how corrupt the government was. Like taxi drivers offer free drive and send students back to their campus, and the city and also brought food and water for students as well. During their hunger strike, hospitals even sent staff members to make sure everyone was safe, and the pharmacists sent free medicines as well. On that day, we all saw how brave these Beijing citizens were. Some people had cards with panels on them, which they used to save students who were under fire. Many put their lives at risk and preached with the troops to stop the slaughter. So it should be obvious by this point that the CCP does not represent the interest of Chinese people, but they always say they do. We never believe in them, or else it wouldn't have been killing them.
Yes, it should be obvious to anyone who knows the truth about what happened. Sadly, a lot of Chinese people don't have many legal resources to know the truth about what the CCP had done, and they don't have the freedom to express political opinions that CCP doesn't approve of. Though unsurprisingly, where there is suppression, there is rebellion. Hong Kong citizens have been commemorating the Tiananmen massacre every year, and also have been protesting a lot for their city's freedom. Besides Hong Kong protesters, there are other protesters who are speaking up for Chinese people's freedoms too, such as those who are as part of the new Federacy of China, which was established on June 4th, 2020, to honor the Tiananmen protesters. So, Hansdale, what do you think are the similarities and differences between political activism in 1989 and now?
32 years ago, China was in the period of reforming and opening up. People started to become interested in democracy when they saw how corrupt the government was. So they became politically active. Well, some of them thought that the CCP could change, while others thought that the CCP could not change. The Tiananmen protesters were protesting to have more open communist government. There is a quote which embodies the Tiananmen spirit which those protesters had. It says, "If a light of hope and the desire of democracy is needed, I would be the match myself. But the result was they got killed. They underestimated the ruthlessness of the CCP and thought that they could be reformed. The sacrifice of the matches didn't succeed. Since then, many people have become cowardly, silent, and hopeless. But the longing for justice and democracy never vanished in the bottom of many Chinese people's heart. So here we are. But this time, we are totally awake and we know the CCP cannot be changed. Tiananmen protesters wanted to talk to the CCP and reform it. But we, new Federal State of China members, believe that the CCP is pure evil and unable to change and not worth to communicate with. Taking down the CCP once for all is our belief now. We want a country without a Communist Party at all.
Hansel, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts today, and I totally agree. The CCP proved to the world that it is not interested in changing, and anyone who asks the change deserves a bullet. After seeing what it did to those Tiananmen protesters and Beijing citizens expecting the CCP to reform itself, I think it's a foolhardy belief. The CCP has lost its right to rule when it turned its guns to its own people. Now we hope that Chinese people can wake up and be brave enough to turn against the CCP for the sake of a brighter future and for putting the restless soul of those slain by the CCP to rest. We will never forget the CCP's crimes and never stop fighting until the CCP is taken down. Take a look at these pictures. One is a tankman from 32 years ago, and one is of a little girl from Hong Kong in 2019. You can see that despite how much time has passed, the government has not changed. It's as evil now as it was then. When looking back at Chinese history and considering the Cultural Revolution, the Great Leap Forward, the One-Child policy, the Tiananmen Square massacre, the persecution of the Falun Gong, the establishment of Xinjiang camps, the Hong Kong issue, it is clear that this is one simple rule the CCP follows. The regime always comes first. The lives of Chinese people can be sacrificed if they become a threat to the tyranny of the CCP. This is Dragon in the Room. Dragon in the Room. It's time to think, ask, and tell. Thank you for watching. See you next time. This is GTalk.